It's Monday here on the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and it is week one of the NFL season. That means the Steelers get to play the Atlanta Falcons. Those will be two new quarterbacks and new systems. Kirk Cousins for the Falcons, Russell Wilson for the Steelers. We're going to talk about that matchup, how the Steelers might use Justin Fields, as well as what the Steelers might be doing with their front office as far as extensions for current players on the team before week one, and how will this offensive line hold up with the injuries that have plagued it all leading up to week one. It's going to be a big episode and a big week in Pittsburgh when it comes to sports. From Chris Carter and Ray Fittipaldo, let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by one of our great Steelers beat writers, Ray Fittipaldo. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our Pittsburgh sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, it is week one, and finally, we will have real football to evaluate this weekend, and all eyes are turning to the quarterback situation. One team in the Steelers, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback in Russell Wilson. One team in the Falcons, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback in Kirk Cousins. And both veteran quarterbacks, both have had success in the NFL. How do you think this shapes up for the Steelers and what they should expect to see from Russell Wilson in this new offense as everyone's still trying to put things together in week one?
Yeah, I mean, Chris, I think it's a work in progress. And, the interesting thing about this week one game is usually there's a lot of mystery in week one about, okay, what is this coach going to do? You mentioned there's a new head coach and new coordinators in Atlanta too, but both of these coaches on both sides, they know each other really well. Mike Tomlin worked with Raheem Morris in the past. Arthur Smith was a head coach in Atlanta last year for the last 3 years. He's going to know that personnel intimately. And, the same goes for, Atlanta. They're going to know what Arthur Smith wants to do. So, I think it's probably going to be, to start off, a conservative game plan for the Steelers. I think they want to give themselves a chance to control time of possession, lean on their defense, and do what, we all think they're going to do, try to win some low-scoring games here. So I don't think you're going to see Russell Wilson throwing the ball all around the field. I think there'll be calculated decisions on when they do take some shots. But, I would expect, what we think we're going to get out of Arthur Smith, and that's ball control, run the ball, play action passing, and, try to win with a somewhat conservative game plan.
I mean, that's sort of what the Steelers have been leaning to all along. Their defense, of course, though, is still the leading part of this team. It's the most expensive part of this team. I think actually I got to check again to see if it's still the most expensive defensive unit in the NFL. I'll figure that out in a second. But Ray, I also want to talk about facing a Kirk Cousins. They faced Kirk Cousins before. I think they've done well against him in the past. But now you're facing a Kirk Cousins that's on a whole new team, and they've got weapons at the Falcons. Bijan Robinson is a nasty running back. Tyler Algier is a good number 2 running back. Like, you could say, hey, athletically, they're comparable to Harrison Warren. By the way, you got Kyle Pitts, you got Drake London. There's lots of weapons to consider over there. How does the Steelers defense face off against a team with a veteran quarterback? Similarly, how the Falcons are figuring out how they're going to face off against the Steelers situation.
Yeah, much in the same way people were taking educated guesses about how Russell Wilson is going to look with the Steelers. They're doing the same thing with Kirk Cousins in Atlanta. Zach Robinson comes over from LA with Raheem Morris. He's a quarterback's coach. He's a former quarterback. So, you would think it's going to be a quarterback-friendly system, and you would think Kirk Cousins adapts quite well to it. But that remains to be seen. Kirk was very successful for a lot of years in that Minnesota system, also very quarterback-friendly. So, if I had to guess between the two, I would say Kirk Cousins is going to put the ball in the air a lot more than Russell Wilson will. And, it's interesting that whole lineage there with Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan and, the coaching tree out there. Zach Robinson was working for Pro Football Focus about 5 years ago. And then he became, quality control guy, then the quarterback's coach, and then the OC. and now he's an OC. So it's just interesting how, football has changed over the years. You don't have to be a lifer to get these types of opportunities. You could actually tackle it in a different way. And certainly, the analytics side certainly plays well into that coaching tree of McAfee and Shanahan.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how they face that. Do you think the Falcons, if they are a more pass-based team, does that help the Steelers? Do you think that plays into some of their strengths? We've seen, Cam Heyward's going to be healthy start the season. Larry Ogunjobi looks like his pass rush, he's healthier this season. Keanu Benton looks like he's going to be sharper there. Watt, Highsmith, Herbig, they're going to be healthy. Could that be something that works in the Steelers' favor if they kind of do lean on Kirk Cousins' arm more than try to be a more conservative, balanced attack with, Bijan Robinson?
Oh yeah, let's step into the shoes of Zach Robinson and Raheem Morris. If you want to take one look at the Steelers defense and try to pick out some weaknesses, what would you do? For me, I would attack the slot corner, whether that's Beanie Bishop or if you want to have a big package, DeMonte Casey, Deshaun Elliott, would be in that role. So I would try to attack them where I think their personnel is lacking a little bit. I don't know about you, Chris. I'm still a little bit surprised that they haven't brought in anyone else to challenge Beanie Bishop. But they might just want to see how he does before they make another big move there. And then again, looking at the Steelers defense from the Atlanta perspective, I'm not feeling real confident that I want to put Kirk Cousins in second and third and long, right? So right. I don't want TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith teeing off. I don't want a healthy Cam Heyward collapsing my pocket. So I think you're going to want to get Bijan Robinson in that running game involved as well. So, think about how the LA Rams did it, with Matt Stafford. Not totally a running team, but they lean on the run enough to keep teams honest. And then they push the ball down the field with Puka Nacua and some of the other great weapons that they have on that team. So Atlanta doesn't have the same types of weapons, but as you mentioned, Drake London's pretty good. Kyle Pitts, big year for him, people think. So, we'll see how it goes. But, I would expect, like I said, I would expect Cousins probably to be a little bit more pass-oriented as compared to the Steelers.
I think that's going to be a part of the story of this game is which team does try to take to the air and can make big plays there. And like you said, if you're attacking a part of the Steelers defense, you might want to attack the corners before you go after and try to let the game be determined by the Steelers pass rush. So it'll be interesting to see how that matchup goes about. We'll see. We will get to talk more about that later this week. But Ray, I want to talk to you about the Steelers, some in-house work they have to do before week one. We know the Steelers and how they operate with their front office. Unless you're a quarterback, they do not negotiate with you once the season is started. And that means there are some serious contract negotiations that need to happen for extensions with players that we were talking about in the summer that are still waiting for those extensions. We'll go over that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter here with Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, I teased extension talk, and that may not sound exciting or sexy as, Brandon Ayuk trades and things like that, but the Steelers have always been about keeping the players that are of value to them, keeping you building from within, and keeping the guys that they really like. And one guy that I think that they really like, and it's pretty obvious, is Pat Freiermuth. This offense is probably going to be featuring him a lot this year. Everyone's wondering about receiver number 2. He's not a receiver, but he is the number 2 option to catch the ball in this offense in Pat Freiermuth. But his rookie contract expires after this season, which means the Steelers, if they're going to extend him, it has to happen this week. Do you foresee that happening, or is this going to be a topic that kind of stretches over the season?
Yeah, I think that's going to get done before Sunday. If you look at some of the past negotiations, Chris, TJ Watt got done, I think, on a Thursday or Friday, 2 days before that Buffalo game a few years back. We were talking to Cam Hayward last week about his contract. He could recall when he was young, I think it was 2014 or so, that Troy Polamalu basically signed his contract before they got on the team plane to go to the opener in Baltimore. So, deadlines tend to spur these things on. it might not be early in the week, but I would expect by the end of this week, before midnight gets here on Saturday night, that Pat Freiermuth will have a new deal. And we speculated on what it's going to take. The one hang up with Pat is kind of like the injury history going back to Penn State, right? He hasn't really, played a full season for the Steelers either. Hasn't missed big chunks of the season, but little nagging things, concussions and hamstring injuries have kind of held him back. But I always thought they could get this done, with between say 12 and 13 million a year. Do that over 4 years. I think that's certainly manageable from the Steelers' perspective, and that would put Pat pretty much in the top 10 or top 12, I think, of top earning tight ends in the league. So as long as that's the price range and, Pat doesn't hold out for more, I think that'll get done at some point this week.
It is really advantageous to the Steelers, many parts of these negotiations. One, Pat Freiermuth has not popped off for you once. Like the most he had in the season was 732 yards, and he only had 2 touchdowns that season. The most touchdowns he had was as a rookie when Ben Roethlisberger was on his last legs of his career, 7 touchdowns, but he only had 497 receiving yards. And to me, that's not indicative of Pat Freiermuth's skills. I think that's more indicative of the situation they'd been in with Matt Canada and the quarterback situation that they were going through. But at the same time, so you have that where you can say, hey, Pat, you don't have like these dominating numbers. We love you, but you can't pay you like Travis Kelce and Kittle. But even the Travis Kelces, the George Kittles, the TJ Hawkinses, the top paid tight ends in the league, they're getting paid like 17 million, 16 million, 15 million a year on average in their deals. So like you're saying, if he's not even there, where like those are like the dominant tight ends that they lead their offenses, like Travis Kelce is the main weapon of the Chiefs passing game. TJ Hawkinson isn't the main weapon, but he's a major one for the Vikings. Kittle, a major one for the Niners. That the Steelers can look at that and say, like, all right, if those are the top tier guys and that's what they're making, you could take a step down from that. And that's why I think the 12, 10 to 12, maybe if he got to up to like 14 million, that I think that's the range that Pat Freiermuth's at. And that is a good weapon. That's a good rate for a guy who can be a really good weapon. Now, you need to use him because last year he only had 308 yards and 2 touchdowns. If that continues, that is a waste of money. You cannot pay $10+ million to a guy that's getting that little amount of yards. But that's where Arthur Smith is supposed to come in, make things easier for Pat Freiermuth, get the ball, make it easier to get the ball to him, and let him actually be the star tight end the Steelers drafted him to be.
Yeah, I mean, think about this, how the Steelers offense might shake out now that they didn't land Brandon Ayuk. George Pickens is the obvious number one. I think we could say pretty clearly, Chris, that Pat Freiermuth will be their second receiving option, probably both in terms of targets and likely yards and receptions, depending on what happens with his injury situation this year. And then you take into account, okay, if you're smart, if you're a defensive coordinator, you're going to bracket George Pickens. You're going to double cover him. And that's going to leave Van Jefferson, Pat Freiermuth, and all the others with single coverage. It's up for those guys to win. But I think there's going to be plenty of chances for Pat Freiermuth to put up career numbers this year in every category, from touchdowns to receiving yards to receptions as well.
Absolutely. I agree with that entirely. He has got to be a big part of this offense. But there's another extension that has been talked about a lot this offseason that haven't learned anything else. And we wrote about that in the Post-Gazette this past weekend. But Cam Heyward, the team captain, the longtime standout, Pro Bowl, maybe Hall of Fame defensive lineman for the Steelers. He's 35 years old this year. He's making a lot of money. And he's $22.4 million against the cap. But he's been looking for an extension. Remember, he started to do a holdout during OTAs, showed up at the end of OTAs, talked last week about why he showed up and why he was present all throughout training camp, even though he's looking for a new deal. But there's no new deal yet. And again, whereas I think Pat Freiermuth a little more forward in obvious because he's 25 years old, he's 26 years old, and you can sign him to be in the prime of his career with your team. Whereas Cam Heyward's been through his prime. But he's still a guy that just before last year had back-to-back seasons with double-digit sacks. Do you see a deal happening here, or do you think the Steelers let this play out and revisit this in the offseason where he could try to hit the open market?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's up to Cam. I think he would have to take significantly less than what he's making now to come back on say a 2-year deal or a 3-year extension, depending on how they want to, work that. he's not going to make the $16 million in salary that he's making this season. Chris, if you go back towards the end of the season, what was the main talking point with Heyward? It wasn't a new contract. It was whether the Steelers were going to cut him and move on and, not absorb that $22 million cap hit. So for me, I always looked at that. By them accepting the $22 million cap hit and the $16 million that they're going to pay him in salary, I always looked at that as kind of like the extension. Okay, we're going to see what you can do this year in 2024. If you do well, yeah, we could do business with you after the season ends, but we're not going to make any types of decisions until we see how you play coming off those core muscle injuries that he had last year. So I think it's smart business for the Steelers not to do something unless Cam Heyward wants to take far less than what he's wanted in the past in a new contract.
I think that's certainly what the Steelers are trying to work out. And again, look, if you're Cam Heyward, you're trying to get paid one last time, while you're in the NFL. He said that he obviously, when you're 35 years old, you're considering retirement. But there's other guys that have done this for a few years. Fletcher Cox with the Eagles, Calais Campbell, defensive linemen. If you're really good as a pass rusher, if you know your technique, if you still got your strength about you, and sometimes that old man strength can really come through for you. And not that he's an old man, but in the NFL terms, 35 years old, you've been around since 2011. That's already a long career. But I think Cam Heyward, if he wants to, he could stick with the Steelers. Listen, this guy grew up in Pittsburgh. His dad played for Pitt. There's a lot of obvious ties. He was drafted here. He's been a captain. This guy carried the flag out for Franco Harris on the weekend that they were honoring him just shortly after he passed away. It makes me wonder if all that will come to the forefront and Cam Heyward will sign a more team-friendly deal to stick around that'll let him stay with the team. Or if he does want to say, you know what, I want one last bag, I want one last big thing, let me go out somewhere and see if I can get paid by someone to do that. But I think a lot of it's going to also be predicated. This might be what the Steelers are waiting on right now. They're like, you know what, Cam, last year you were hurt. Got to see if that carries over, and that might mean seeing him play in the regular season. And if he can finish the regular season healthy, then it's a whole nother discussion. But that could be a gamble that also backfires. Let's say he plays a full season, gets double-digit sacks again, and he's playing really well. Then Cam Heyward can say, you know what? I still got it. So I do want a bag. And then the Steelers would have missed out on the opportunity to say, hey, let's negotiate a more team-friendly deal. So it's an interesting game that you always got to play, and it just makes me wonder which basket will Omar Khan put his eggs in when it comes to these negotiations.
Yeah, when you look at the situation with Cam, he didn't play in the preseason. So if you're the Steelers, can you watch practice? Can you watch him in the weight room? Can you watch him, just in the overall setting of training camp practices and convince yourself that he is the same player that he was in 2021 or 2022? I don't know how you can do that. And the big part of the equation is, even if he does look great in practice, it's the injuries. And when you get older, those soft tissue injuries tend to happen a lot more frequently than they do earlier in your career. So that's another part of the equation. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting week. Right now, as we sit here, I don't think Cam's going to get done, but, we'll see what happens as we get towards Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Absolutely. But while there's all these concerns about the front offense of the quarterback play, there are injury concerns that have addressed the Steelers, and a lot of it deals with their offensive line. I want to talk about good news and bad news on that offensive line and what to expect week one against the Falcons defensive front. It's going to have talent with it. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo here on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's North Shore Drive podcast. Stick with us. We got a lot to discuss. But first, I remind you, this show is brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can today go to your Moon Township Honda at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania, and also at moonhonda.com. Again, moonhonda.com, 5802 University Boulevard, Moon Township, Pennsylvania. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
To build the Honda CR-V Hybrid, we took everything you love about the CR-V and kicked it up a notch with greater power for a CR-V unlike any before. Adventure confidently with Honda, Car and Driver's most awarded brand in 10 Best history. The CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, part of the Honda line of rugged vehicles. Visit your local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily. Buy online or reserve from select Honda dealers.
The North Shore Drive podcast is also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci, your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call today for a free consultation from Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're back here in the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the Steelers' offensive line. Now, we knew last week we got the unfortunate news for the Steelers. Isaac Seumalo suffered a pec injury, but not all bad because he's not out for the season, and pec injuries usually can lead to something like that. But he's out for a month, and he was the guy that was going to be the leader of this offensive line, the best player on it. Now, that job at left guard is going to be a battle between Spencer Anderson and Mason McCormick. We'll get to Troy Fautanu and the tackle situation in a little bit. But, Ray, how do you expect this battle to go out? Anderson, a 7th-round pick from last year, who's a more versatile guard and player that can kind of line up in different spots. McCormick, drafted specifically this year in the 4th round to be a guard. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I do think they'll let it play out a little bit, Chris, but you want your starter to be in place and to get all the reps. I would certainly think by Thursday you would want that to happen. And I think it's probably going to be Spencer Anderson unless he really struggles here early in the week. If you think back to those practices at St. Vincent, Isaac Seumalo got once every 3 days. It seemed like he was getting a veteran day off. So it wasn't Mason McCormick who was taking those reps with the ones. It was Spencer Anderson. And Spencer Anderson did pretty well. For me, when I think of Spencer Anderson struggling this summer, it was always when they bumped him out to tackle. And, it seemed like that's where he struggled a little bit. And, I talked to him about maybe a week or 2 weeks ago. He kind of feels like he's found his home at guard now. So if you just let him settle in at guard, see if he can handle this, play with him there for one game. Listen, if he struggles, you can go to Mason McCormick. You could even go to Troy Fautanu, once he is completely healthy here. But, yeah, I think for game one, Spencer Anderson has been the backup left guard all summer. He's done well. I'd see if he can go out there and repeat that against the Falcons.
I certainly think that's a big question here, but you brought up the next thing I was going to talk about, and that's Troy Fautanu. Fautanu expects to practice this week. This guy has missed 2 preseason games, and then the first preseason game, he looked, not great, but he looked like a rookie getting his feet under him. We know the Steelers don't like to put rookies out there who aren't experienced and aren't like ready to go. But as we've reported here at the Post-Gazette, the Steelers also felt like he was their second best offensive lineman when he was healthy in camp and preseason this year. Do you anticipate Troy Fautanu to do enough to get back in the starting lineup, or do you think they might give this another week or so to let him kind of get back and reacclimated with things?
Yeah, my gut tells me that they'll probably roll with Broderick Jones and Dan Moore at the tackle spots. And I don't want to say ease Troy back in, but just give him a little bit of time, coming off that injury. To me, what will be telling, they were practicing on Monday, on Labor Day, Players' Day off on Tuesday, and then a normal week starting on Wednesday with practices Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday before they travel on Saturday. Listen, if he's out there with the ones on Wednesday, then listen, they think he's healthy and they're going to roll with him. If he's not, if it's still Broderick Jones on the right side, Dan Moore on the left side, then I think that's going to be a pretty clear indication that Broderick will be in there for week one. But there's no doubt once he is healthy, once he's able to practice for a little bit, he's, as you mentioned, one of their 2 best offensive linemen. That's how they feel internally about him, and he's going to be on the field sooner rather than later.
And so that's kind of what I want to talk about too, is not just, if he's back, but if he's back, what does that do for the Steelers offensive line? Is it Broderick Jones who moves? Because a lot of people presume, well, there's 2 first-round picks, so you put the first-round picks in. But Dan Moore Jr. held up pretty well in preseason. And I know that the Steelers, the reason that they're drafting these offensive tackles is because Dan Moore Jr. has not done well enough in past years, and that's been a concern. But now, if you're the Steelers, you're looking at this and you're like, this is a young offensive line. The only guy that's going to play in this first game that's not on a rookie deal right now is James Daniels, the right guard. Zach Frazier's a rookie. Fautanu's a rookie. Broderick Jones, 2nd year. Dan Moore Jr., 4th year. And then whoever starts at left guard, whether it's Spencer Anderson, a 2nd-year player, or Mason McCormick, a rookie, this is a very young O-line. So if you were to put Fautano and Jones out there, it's even younger because now you're taking the only other guy with more than a year of experience, off the O-line. What do you expect to be the tackle situation? Let's explore that. Just like, let's say Fautano is healthy and ready to go.
Yeah.
Who are the Steelers' offensive tackles starting this week in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, Chris, I think if you think about it, Troy had maybe 1 week with the ones, and then the first half of that first preseason game where he was at right tackle and Broderick flipped to the left side. So I think Broderick only had really parts of 1 week where he was working on the left side of the line. Since Troy's been injured, he's been back on the right side. He hasn't had any reps on the left side. And when you factor in that elbow injury, and there's another mysterious injury out there that he's dealing with, when you factor in his injury situation and the fact that he hasn't repped over there on the left side, to me, they just let it play out with Dan Moore. Broderick goes to the bench. And you mentioned how Dan Moore has done well this preseason. He has. But if you're the coaching staff and you know his history, you just sort of let him regress to the mean, right? Regress to what he's been in the past. And then, boom, you insert Broderick Jones. And maybe that's game 3, maybe that's game 5, maybe that's game 7. But I think you let it play out that way, just given the preseason that Broderick has had to deal with here. So that's kind of the way I think it's going to go. It's all speculation right now. We've asked Broderick Jones about this multiple times in the last couple of weeks.
I think he's tired of answering it too. Like, he's kind of just like, yeah.
And sometimes they'll have conversations behind closed doors with guys, and they just don't tell us stuff. But I don't get that feeling this time. I really don't think they've had that conversation yet with Broderick, and I think that's only going to happen once they know Troy is 100% healthy. And hey, listen, that conversation could come as early as this week.
Absolutely. But being there this week is the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The Steelers resume practice on Monday. Mike Tomlin talks on Tuesday. They'll get to release the things on Wednesday. It'll be a big week where our whole team will be there. Brian Batko, Ray Fittipaldo, Jerry Dulac, and yours truly here, Chris Carter, will be at the Steelers facility all week long, getting you ready for week 1 in Atlanta when the Steelers take on the Falcons. Don't miss any of that. Subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. Find us here on the North Shore Drive podcast every Monday, Wednesday, Friday on your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those episodes, as well as all of the daily content that comes out from our sports writers here at the Post-Gazette. We got a lot coming at you this week, so stay tuned for all of it. We'll talk about it all here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.